Hey, it's me, Rob Ryan, and I am back for another incredible conversation and a new episode of Entrepreneurial Thinkers. Would you ever think that you could go viral on social media for trying to convince people that if we just had more conversation with each other and we found common ground, that we could build a little bit better world? My guest today, Nisha Anand, the CEO of Dream.org, has done just that. Her TED Talk talking about radical common ground and the power of long-form conversation and crossing divides, building unlikely relationships and unlikely alliances with people we might vehemently disagree about certain issues with. That is what we talk about today on this episode. So if you are interested in that, if you find that intriguing as I did, or if you're someone like me who thinks deeply about the most complex issues that we face in society as a whole and how we can go about applying more entrepreneurial thinking to those complex problems to build bridges instead of walls and to create complex, sustainable, or as Nisha says, durable solutions that can last for generations, this is a conversation you're going to want to enjoy. I was absolutely grateful to have this conversation, that she would sit down with me and allow us to talk so deeply and openly about this reality that we are trying to both carve in our own different ways. It was an incredible gift, and it's a gift that I'm giving to you. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation in this episode as much as we did. Hola, hello, hi, bienvenido, and welcome back or welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers. If you're a listener, if you're not a listener, I'm about to tell you what this show is all about. This is the show where I get to have weekly conversations with some of the best and brightest entrepreneurial thinkers across all sectors and segments of our society as we come together in conversation to try and leave this world just a little bit better than we found it. So today, in that spirit, I couldn't be more excited to be joined by Nisha Anand, the CEO of Dream.org. Nisha's story is literal proof that real change happens when we commit to things that we passionately believe in and we dare to find common ground. She is, above all else, a mom, then an activist, a storyteller, and now an executive leader of a social justice organization called Dream.org. Her own story, including the importance of her Indian American heritage, has covered an amazing landscape already, from being a self-described punk rock protester who was once arrested in Burma for handing out pro-democracy leaflets, to a viral TED talker, to having her written works now published on the likes of media platforms and sites such as CNN, The Hill, and Fast Company. She's dedicated her life to bridging divides that many think are frankly impossible to cross. Her TED Talk, The Radical Act of Choosing Common Ground, has inspired millions to rethink what's possible in our polarized world. Whether it's justice reform, green innovation, or tech equity, Nisha believes that the toughest challenges can only be solved when we work with unlikely allies, building sometimes unexpected relationships. With decades of activism, leadership, love, empathy, and a little dash of what I like to call Berkeley, California's kind of famous open-minded vibes in her, she's not just imagining a better future, she's helping us build it every day. And all of this is what drew me to wanting to host this conversation with her for quite some time, as I try to help you, our audience, to understand how we can all apply a little bit more unconventional entrepreneurial thinking to our lives as we strive to leave this world a little bit better than we found it. Nisha, it's amazing to share this conversation with you today. Welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers.
Thank you. And thanks for that introduction. That was pretty awesome, Rob.
You are pretty awesome, Nisha. So that was a fair introduction of you. Really, really grateful. For those that are going to see this on the YouTube, I got to give a quick Northern Cal Bay Area shout out here. That is not a fake background that Nisha has behind her. In fact, that is beautiful downtown somewhere in Oakland, which is, I am a fan. My love for Berkeley and the Bay Area ties back to my daughter having graduated from Cal Berkeley. And so I spent those years traversing back and forth and just spending a lot of time around her. And now we've got kind of Bears Berkeley culture embedded in us as a family because her fiance, Henry, and now the parents of my first grandchild, Leo, that has just happened in the last 6 weeks, they are all Berkeley Bears.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
A fantastic place to raise kids. I've raised my kids here. We are very much townies and loved growing up and raising them in Berkeley.
I love it. Well, I got to tell you, I've been super excited about having this conversation with you for a long time. It's funny because as I just made kind of a passing reference to Leo, my now 6-week-old grandson, frankly, a lot of what we're going to discuss today is rooted in the idea that the young people, your kids, my grandson, my daughter who's in her 30s, my niece, who, by the way, I have a question from later, who's a junior in high school. That they're the ones that are going to take the legacy of the work that you have spent your lifetime to date so immersed in, right? That they're going to take this legacy and that they're going to, frankly, just as I love to say, do better.
Yeah.
Right. They're going to do better and be better than both of us. And
that's the hope.
And that is ultimately the hope, right? That is ultimately the hope. So we're trying to have a conversation today to enlighten a path forward for Leo and Gabby and everybody that's going to come after us. And I'm super grateful that you're giving us that time.
Great.
Let's jump in.
All right.
First question. This has been the question that's been on my mind since I've contemplated. You would not know this. I had you kind of on my target guest list for like a year before I really reached out and said, like, I've got to get her on the show. And it's this question has been eating away at me for that entire time, which is, how do we apply more entrepreneurial thinking to our social justice systems?
That's where we need the entrepreneurial thinking. It's funny because the motivation often for innovation is something's broken, something's wrong. We want to innovate and fix it. Somewhere along the lines, we lost just that curiosity and that excitement of solving a big problem. And now it's around which product can get me more money. And that's where we're applying this what a horrible word, thinking. Horrible word to try to say 100 times in a row.
You don't have to say, you can just say innovation if you want. It's okay.
Great. And because of that, we end up getting, better processing times for sharing photos. That's not going to change the world. We are the people who figured out on this planet electricity in the early days. And now when we're thinking of innovation, like, we're putting people into space, like anyone can do it. We know how to get energy from the sun and power electric vehicles and get our house. Like, we have the ability to solve tough problems. We always have. We're applying that thinking. We are applying that kind of spirit of discovery and curiosity to the wrong problems. Yeah. I look at homelessness in America. That's one. It's not an issue that I work on at dream.org, but I look at it and it's like, that should be solvable. And that's what I think we need to do, is think about what are actually the issues that plague us, and let's put our best thinkers behind it. And I know we can come up with better ideas. I like to think about the prison system as an example I give to a lot of folks. We have this old technology, dungeons, and we think that that's the best way to rehabilitate anybody for any reason, is put them in a dungeon for X amount of years and somehow they're going to come out better. There is a better technology out there to solve some of those problems. Like, that's a very obvious one. Like, can we disrupt the prison industry? We could.
No, that's incredible. I mean, it's so, and we're about to spend, 45 minutes to an hour talking about what I'm about to now say is, like, it's so obvious and simple, right? Yet obviously from your work and your dedication to these topics, you realize it's not that simple, right? And so but we're the problem. So let's widen this out a little bit, right, if we can. So how do we then apply this thinking to what I think begins us on the pathway towards solutions and discussions about possible solution, which is greater discussion, right? Or healthy debate, right? So you are famous, and we're going to get into a lot of the specific instances of your thesis on common ground and conversation. So let's start out with this. We now understand we've got to just shift and apply our entrepreneurial thinking and our innovative thinking to the real problems, the bigger problems that are facing us. So now let's go to that layer of how do we apply it to just having discussions about the things that we disagree about or debate around to get to those solutions, right?
Well, we're living in polarized times, and the polarization seems to be getting worse and not better. And it's not universal. It's not universal polarization across every single aspect of life. You can be in the community in a school, although schools are becoming very polarized as well. But you could be in a school district where you get things done across every type of difference, economic difference, racial difference, voting politically differently. You get things done because you have a common purpose. You care about the kids, you care about their education. I'm starting to see how this example is kind of losing people at this moment. But let's say a year ago, that would have been a great example. There are ways to solve problems, and we know how. It does start with a few things that you mentioned and I already mentioned as well. Curiosity, listening, having the conversations, and being willing to talk to people who might come at the problem from a different angle.
Yeah.
I think one of the, just a bit philosophical is, we all know we don't know everything. I mean, some of us know we don't know anything. I think maybe
Right.
that goes to a different philosophical level. But if you can embrace that you might not always be right, then there's room to talk to someone who might know something you don't. Now, that's a hard step to say, okay, just embrace not knowing and talk to a random person. That's not going to solve everything, but it's certainly a start and something too many people
Yeah.
are unwilling to do right now.
No, I would 100% agree. I created something, shared something to another show that we do on a weekly basis on Fridays called Stop and Shine, which is me, just kind of me sharing my thoughts for the week. And I talked about conversation. And I think it was maybe in part, I was thinking about this last week and I
Uh-huh.
kind of, video essayed it because I was in preparing mentally for this conversation with you. And to your point, right, we just, the technologies you referred to in the opening, right? Like we've, to some degree, maybe unintentionally, maybe intentionally, right? We've automated out the humanity from our normal discourse as citizens, right? And so I say, and this is just my weird little life, like some of the most interesting conversational experiences or human experiences I have are with people like the barista at the coffee shop down the street that I go to here in Hollywood all the time, or who I kind of know his story and he kind of knows mine because we've had that little relationship for like 3-4 years now, right? Or the checkout woman that works at the CVS who I happen to have realized like lives in the building next to me. And so I don't see her at the CVS very often, but I see her in the neighborhood as I'm on my walks, and we have little conversations. And when I tell those stories, and not to make this generational, but like when I tell those stories to my daughter who's 31, right, or to her peers, or even to my peer group, people in their late 50s, like I always almost get this incredulous like reaction of, I can't believe you talked to the barista that much, or I can't believe you talked to the woman who works at
Right.
CVS. And
I know my daughter's like totally embarrassed when I strike up conversations with strangers. I'm like, humans are endlessly fascinating. Like, fascinating. We all have different circumstances and we find ourselves in this coffee shop at this same moment together. Like, that should blow everyone's mind all the time.
yeah, and to your point earlier, right? If we've automated out, and we're about to try and AI out those conversations, then and then if we think about that, maybe that's how you were raised. It's definitely how I was raised, and I was exposed, and so therefore, like I'm a bit more conversational than maybe some of my peers. But if we automate that out, like my fear is, have we lost the skill? Like have we then lost the ability or the confidence or the self-awareness that comes from being able to have the conversation with the barista? And if we've done that, how are we ever going to have a conversation at a school board meeting, or have a conversation at a PTA meeting, or have a conversation in a political context around the failing bridges and the lack of healthcare and the homelessness problems and the all that, right? That's I think that's what I'm hearing you say.
I it's interesting because I think there are two pieces to that. There's one, are we going to lose the art of conversation and the ability to connect with people on a human level? And then do we know how to talk to people in a productive way? I think those are kind of two different things because right now there's a lot of conversation happening and it's nasty and it's pointing fingers and people are not scared to talk to people. They just aren't listening and they're, pointing fingers and pointing blame. Every time there's been a big advance in technology, I think parents have worried this is going to make my child antisocial, when they were in front of the TV all day,
Sure.
when the internet started,
Right.
with all of this social media happening. But there's a balance that comes out. So my hope is, although there might be a small subset of a generation that does not know how to make eye contact with humans, I think it's been leveling out, right? I think that they still have to advocate for themselves in the future world. If they're in business, in colleges with their professors, like the way we communicate with each other changes. And so there is a way in which the way I did it, just like talk to any human you meet, is
Sure.
out of style. But the ability to communicate, I think those human interactions are now more valuable. And the people who do it well are going to be the ones that have the most currency in this future. So the folks that are hiding behind their screens, the ones that really don't want to venture out, are scared to put themselves out in public, I think that's going to lower their value in the future economy because we will need the humans, that human ability to connect, make you feel heard and seen. those folks will matter a lot more in the future because
That's
it might
fascinating.
not be a skill everyone has.
It's an important mile marker for folks too, right? What a wayfinder to understand, like, hey, this is your opportunity, right? We have it intuitively inside of us. If we're choosing to allow the technologies to front for us, we're diminishing our own value in the overall conversation.
I mean, I'm happy to have technology do all of the tasks I don't like that don't require a human. I love that they've been
Right.
innovating. Um, but no one can make you feel the way when you have a great conversation with a
Yeah.
friend. That
100%.
feeling has not been replicated,
Yeah.
as far as I
100%.
know. But the bigger question, can we have productive conversations, ones that help us solve problems? That's what I kind of wake up and I'm obsessed about every day. That's the thing that I'm worried we won't be able to do in the future.
Yeah. No, and that's what we're unpacking today. Why? Let's go back. Like, why this work for you? Like, what was it? What was it about your upbringing or what you were exposed to that has shaped your life on this path forward?
There are so many factors. I think that I always was a bit of a misfit. I felt completely out of the norm from the time I was born. I was born in the 70s. I had an immigrant father. So my dad is from India, my mom is from the States. So I was kind of this like, that was not common in the 70s. I moved
Right.
into the South where everyone was Black or white in Atlanta, Georgia. I was neither of those things. When my mom left, I was raised by at a very young age, my father and stepmother, both from India in Atlanta in the South. I felt like I didn't fit in.
Wow.
And as that, and I didn't quite understand it. You don't really put words to it when you're young. But I think that misfit energy has me, since as long as I can remember, always rooting for the underdog. No matter what it is, sports or just in life, I just have this like underdog feeling. And from an early age, I discovered that my ability to adapt in different settings, to still play with the neighborhood kids, even though I didn't look like them or have families like them or eat like them, to fit in at school or to fit in the Indian community, the Indian immigrant community, which was thriving, that ability to move in the different worlds became a strength for me to understand that
Mm.
I can do something to help underdogs. I don't have to have, when you're a misfit, you can stay a misfit and feel like the world's against you, or you can say, I'm going to make the world a better place for misfits like me. And I took that latter approach from as young as I can remember. And it had me then jumping into social justice movements in different ways my whole life. I was a high school activist and a college activist. I was arrested about a dozen times in those college years for any cause almost. It was kind of like, that's a good cause. Sure. Put my,
Okay.
neck on the line. Literally, I've chained my neck to outside of an embassy before, right? Like this was
Literal neck
literally
on line. I
neck
love
on the
that.
line. And I've been trying to make that world a better place. And I've been obsessed with making a difference. And different things I've done throughout my life have made more of a difference than others. And it's just how you experiment with any solution you bring into the world. If you're an innovator, you try it out and whatever works, whatever gets you more change at scale, that's the method I'm going to go with. So I do have a moral reason why I care about social justice. And there are definitely philosophical reasons why I choose some of the fights I choose and how I fight them. But honestly, there are a whole lot of strategic reasons, and they have a lot in common with innovation is how can I get change at scale? What's the smallest thing I can do to have the biggest impact?
Right.
And a lot of times, there is a way in which if you're the outside person protesting and making noise, you are raising awareness. You are bringing change to an issue. That is a very important part of the social justice ecosystem. And that was me.
Wow.
Where I am now is very much like one piece of legislation, if it's done well and it's durable and it won't be overturned, that can be social change at scale. One piece of legislation can change the outcome for so many people. And so I've been working more in that political, policy, legislative realm later in my life because I've been able to see the impact in a different way.
Oh, that's incredible and inspiring. You referenced it in the beginning, right? We live in, and I think we're always in polarized times across certain issues, right? There's always something to be polarized and on opposite ends of societally speaking. So, is it more today versus, who knows, right? We weren't alive in the late 1800s, so maybe it was more polarized in the late 1800s about certain issues. But we are divided in many ways across so many different lines, right? So we're divided across generations, geography, ideology, borders, political affiliations, cultures, race, economics, religious beliefs, gender, and probably a dozen other things I'm not thinking about. You talk so often and so powerfully about choosing common ground, right? And just that wording of like that's a verb, that's an active word,
Yes.
right? Choosing common ground. Help us understand, what does that look like in practice,
Yeah.
as a person out there in the world?
It is so easy to see the way that we're different. That comes really easy for human beings. And I'm not exactly sure why. We compare the things that we have, the ways we look, um, any number of things. We're constantly comparing. So it's easy to find the differences. It's a little harder to find the commonalities. And a lot of folks think common ground is like wishy-washy when you say, oh, but we're all human and, we all want to breathe clean air. Those things are not a given. Dehumanization is what's led us to wars. That's what allows you to oppress. That's what has caused all the ill willings. This ability to dehumanize a population means you can do horrible things to them. So yeah, connecting with humanness, connecting that the part of you that's human and the part of me that's human, to me, that's not like wishy-washy and like woo and out there. To me, that's fundamental to social change. We are human. We actually do all have the right to breathe clean air. All of us want to live in safe communities. We want our families, we want our children to grow old. Those are starting points you can choose. One of the examples I like to tell people about was during the pandemic when all of baseball was shut down in California. And my son in high school, he wants to be a pitcher in college. Well, in Texas, they did not shut down baseball. So those kids are still playing, they're still pitching. And my son has nowhere to play. And we joined this team of kind of, at that point, they're the rebels and renegades who didn't care about the pandemic restrictions. We had to drive about an hour away to be on this team. And they traveled during the pandemic. And I made that choice because I knew that this was my son's path forward, that he needed to pitch. But this group of people, they were not like me for the most part. Very Republican, very, at that point, this is early in the pandemic, anti-mask, very different. The first trip I took with them was the weekend of the Trump Biden election. And remember that whole week we were together. We had no idea what the outcome of that election was, right? We were going back and forth and back and forth. And I'm traveling with these folks who very different than me. But all of us had chosen to be together because our sons play baseball. We cared about their future. We wanted them to have that childhood experience, and we were willing to put a lot on the line to make it happen for them. Yeah. That's a lot of common ground to work from.
In spite of probably some other persistent throughout the relationship of that team, right? Probably some other very different views about very specific
everything
pieces of it, right? Exactly.
Very different views about everything.
There may have even been some other predominant motivations for some of those other parents, in addition to their, whereas yours was predominantly like, I'm putting my son's future well-being in the course of his professional career life ahead of everything else. I'm going to set that. There may have been other families in there who had the, like, I'm making a political statement, I'm doing this, and it's going to benefit my kid. But you all mixed together.
Yeah. And it was a beautiful thing because, during the pandemic, there weren't many people you saw at the beginning. And these were the people I saw. I spent my weekends with. I traveled. And I remember one night, if anyone has travel, if you're a travel team parent and you had to go on travel, this kind of, you're at a hotel in the middle of nowhere and you end up having like beer in the parking lot because you can't have it in the hotel or whatever the circumstances were. And we're up late talking, and the coach, who's very Republican and he was very anti-mask. He's also a Vietnamese refugee who grew up in Iowa. So complicated individual. We were talking about whatever it was. And I was talking about one of the pieces of legislation I was working on. And he said he was willing to say, I had no idea that women inside prison were shackled during childbirth. That's horrific. What can I do? That is a common ground issue. No one I know has said, oh yeah, women should be shackled during childbirth.
Right.
But if you aren't willing to talk with someone who thinks differently, you can't find that common ground issue. Obviously, that's something most people will care about.
Right.
So it's not just like, oh, we're, talking baseball and we can have that kind of like yay and cheer for the kids. By willing to be in that community with the folks, you can actually find deeper ways you care, issues that you can really relate to, and you can build something from that. You can absolutely build something.
So fundamentally, right? It's that I had a question I'm not going to ask because we've already kind of touched on it, but there's a piece of it that you just hit on, right? We move past the sound bites, right? We move past trading memes and gifs and clips with each other that supposedly are supposed to represent or encapsulate like the entirety of our deep thinking about this one particular issue, which of course is nonsense. Like that's a horrible way to represent like how you think or feel deeply about truly complex, nuanced issues. And yet you wind up in the parking lot, at midnight over probably a Natty Light or some cheap beer that somebody bought at a convenience store that was still open during the pandemic, right? And you're talking to this guy, and well, what do you do, Nisha? What do you do for work, right? And I help make sure that women are unshackled when they give birth in prison. And it's like, what? Like, and then immediately there's all the other differences, all the other dislikes or perceptions about each other fade away. Doesn't mean they go away. They fade away to allow something else to be the gathering point in a longer conversation.
And then it became so fun. And we're of the age, you might remember when we were young, it used to be fun to argue. I used to hear my parents argue about politics.
Right.
In Indian culture, the men stay up late arguing about politics, and that's fun. We can have that again. But instead, it's seen as this big affront to everybody's like, if you think differently than me, you don't want me to be alive. That's not true. Yeah. That's never been, that has been true in a few circumstances in history, but that is not the majority of people at all. No. They just think they have a better solution to the problems we're all facing. We're looking at the same problems, different solution sets to solve it.
It's amazing. You told an amazing story about just kind of how your life informed, and even now, just that last example again, like how your life colored who you've become, which is all of our stories, and then how you've applied it to your work. So let's talk about your work. Tell us about what used to be called the Dream Corps, right? Which is dream.org. Give us its origin story. How did it get started? How did you get involved? And then let's talk about kind of the daily work that it does, because I know it's evolved in recent years, and it's really important. I love going through the website in preparation for the interview and kind of diving in, even exposing myself to things that I wasn't aware you guys were focused on now. So let's make sure we start. But first things first, like what is it and how did it get started?
Sure. So Dream.org is a national nonprofit organization, and we are really interested in solving this problem of polarization actually first, that we can't solve big problems that the US faces without being able to talk across difference, without being able to kind of decrease the heat and polarization. And that's how it started 15 years ago. It was Rebuild the Dream was its first iteration, founded by Van Jones after he left the Obama administration. And the idea was, can we take big problem sets and apply this way of thinking, which we now call the Dream way, the dream.org way, of bringing people together to solve the problem. So let's take the two biggest problem sets that we don't think there's any agreement on right now. And the ones that were chosen were climate and criminal justice reform. These were not bipartisan issues when we started at all. Can we take those big issues, make change at scale in a way that shows democracy works, that you actually can work with Republicans and Democrats? We can sit down at the same table. We can work with industry leaders in technology and grassroots activists on the ground and solve problems. We can bring together industry who's trying to maximize profits in an area and folks that are dealing with pollution in the same area and come up with a solution. So we have this unlikely allies quality. And we feel like if you can bring people together and solve something, you've solved two things. You haven't just solved, where is that factory going to be built in my neighborhood? You've actually solved polarization a bit too, by showing that we can work together. Wow. So that's a little bit of the trick. We chose those two issues as a start and made a lot of headway on those issues. Now people will say, when I first started, I thought criminal justice reform and bipartisan, I thought that was an oxymoron. They didn't go together. Right. Now people say to me, they're like, immigration isn't like criminal justice reform. That's easy to have bipartisanship on, but not immigration. I'm like, people thought I was crazy when I said bipartisan criminal justice reform before. So I know just in that short time of being here at this organization, that can change. And even on climate, you actually have plenty of Republicans now on board wanting to see some of this climate policy keep going and keep working and keep moving through. So I know it's possible to have bipartisan agreement on some of our biggest problems. We've done it before. So dream.org we're obsessed with applying that idea that you can bring people together across these divides and solve big problems. And it's almost, it really could be any problem, but those are the two problems that we're working on right now.
You've used the word obsessed like a half dozen times so far in the conversation, which I absolutely love, because I have a phrase that I kind of have fallen into in recent months in interviews where I say, like, one of the reasons that I love doing this show and I love creating this platform to help amplify and tell the stories of people like you is that I love waking up in the morning and knowing that there are people like you who wake up obsessed about things that I don't wake up obsessed about every day. Right. So like I am a generalist. I am a curious about everything person in life, but we need then people who wake up who are just, as we had a recent guest, Amantha Bagdon, who I love telling her story because it's such a unique experience, because it's something that we all interact with on a daily basis, but probably don't think about very often. She is obsessively solving for the inefficiencies inside of the pharmacy world. Right. And she was a pharmacy technician, and specifically independent pharmacies versus, say, the Amazons or the big corporate brands. Right. And she's obsessed with that. And she sees where it intersects with our healthcare failings and with our cost overruns and with our drug problem, like cost problems. And like, she sees all that because she wakes up obsessed about it. So I love to know that you and your team of probably other people just like you who wake up obsessed about these issues on a daily basis. It's awesome. How did you find your way to Dream, whatever it was called in the beginning?
Yeah, I think Rebuild the Dream was where I first started working. I had been doing a lot of movement and community organizing work after college. I was at the War Resisters League in New York doing national organizing amongst our chapters. I worked at the Ruckus Society, teaching people how to chain themselves to buildings and, you know, in protest of things like WTO protests back then, World Bank and IMF. And I was at the Rape Crisis Center after that as well, the Rape Crisis Center in the city. Okay. And when I first had kids and I realized I didn't want to work full time, I went to consulting and I consulted with these same groups, smaller movement-based groups, a lot of fundraising. I was a fundraising professional. And at some point, I kind of lost myself when the kids were little, and a lot of folks do. And I felt a little bit politically homeless. I knew that I wanted to make a big change. I think we all have those kind of, I'm getting older, my kids are getting older, what am I doing with my life? Sure. Feelings, and wanting to make a difference before I left this planet was important. And I knew I wanted to play a bigger game. If I've always been this kid who's rooting for the underdog, I didn't feel I was making enough impact with my life. And so I started to do a lot of reflection. What do I want to do? Where do I want to work? And I made a list of places that perhaps would be good for me, just organizations. I made a list of names of people who I saw in the world doing big things. And I was also getting my coaching certificate, which means you get a lot of coaching yourself. So there were a lot of people like in my head trying to help me figure out my next step. And one of the names I wrote down on the paper was Van Jones, the founder of Rebuild the Dream, because when I knew Van, when I met him, he was just a protester on the street like me. And when my kids were young, he had left the Obama administration and he was on CNN. So this is someone I knew with my same politics, I've been running around the streets, is now playing that bigger game. And that name was on my list. And probably a week later, a fundraising job for Rebuild the Dream, which was his organization at the time, came across my desk.
Oh, wow.
And being a fundraiser, I knew I could get that job with kind of this hidden agenda of, I want to play big. This is my one life. I want to move as much
good for you
change as possible. So,
boy, talk about manifesting.
Right? Yeah.
That's incredible. That's an awesome story. And boy, what a personality, right? He is. I don't know him just from, like you say, following and having followed. I actually think we do have a couple of common friends. There's a former guest alumni of our show who's become a great friend over the years from Chicago named Isaac McCoy. And Isaac worked in the first Obama administration as well. And so I think there are some common bonds between those guys. But obviously, I mean, he in and of himself, just the way he presents himself in media, is the tip of the spear for for this, like, I'm going to push, I'm going to tug, I'm going to stretch, I'm going to try and operate outside the bounds of what people have defined me as, because I'm going to try and instigate conversation, which I've always respected.
Absolutely.
Even
Very gifted communicator.
Yeah. Even when we might, like you said, disagree on a particular point or a particular idea, just you have to respect the game, right? So that's awesome. Let's talk about the dream.org a little bit more, right? So you guys use some language on your website that I just found beautiful. You use these phrases. You dream of a world beyond pollution. You dream of a world beyond mass incarceration. You dream of a world beyond economic inequality. How do those fit together? Like, I mean, because they're all such massive, independently important issues that, frankly, it's like the Russian nesting dolls of issues, right? I mean, there's issues inside the issues inside the. I mean, the idea of dreaming of a world beyond economic inequality, that probably is an organization all by itself somewhere in the world, right? So
Right.
you guys have woven these three themes together. Talk to us about how they stand independent in your work from one another, and then how they do come together to scale up this type of change.
Well, we're dream.org. So it's easy to find us on the internet, Dream, because that's what we are. So when you ask me right at the beginning, when you asked me, how can we apply more innovation into social change problems? Where are the entrepreneurs in social justice? It has to start with a dream. If you can't say, I want to dream of a world beyond pollution, you're not going to come up with the solution. So you do have to start with that big goal. You need a North Star. You need to push yourself as far as possible in order to dream up the solutions today. You know, it's like when folks want to solve, some problem, they're like, oh, I really want to lose weight. That's a problem, everyone has. And they're like, but, it means I can't eat this cupcake tomorrow. I'm going to eat the cupcake tomorrow, right? If you can't dream of a world where you're successful, every single thing is going to set you back. Every single thing will sound like, why not? Why not put it off? Or we can't do that. That might be too hard. Everything becomes too hard. So you've got to start with the dream. And that's what dream.org does.
Yeah.
Our community of people have big dreams. And a lot of times, I kind of talked about capitalism being a little bit of the problem in entrepreneurial thinking in this day and age. But also part of the problem is connection and networks and relationships. And a lot of the people with the big dreams, the ones who can think of how do we get beyond prisons, the ones who can think about how do we get beyond poverty, those are not the folks with the networks that are going to fund their ideas.
Right.
In Silicon Valley, we still have, it's shrinking, the percentage of founders of color. I think it's under 1% for Black founders.
It's gotten worse in the last 5 years. From a position where it was already bad, it's somehow managed to get worse.
It's gotten worse.
Yeah.
And from where I sit, invention and ideas have usually come from the people most impacted by the problem.
Yep.
Those are the ones that actually can dream of the way out there. And so that's what I mean.
So the common synergy that binds these three wildly independently important topics together underneath your banner is the dream, right? And the ability to supersede reality and our present time limitations and think ahead to a world without this problem, a world without this problem. That's the common theme. Independent to one another, like help draw me some comparisons, maybe a couple stories that is examples, like compare, say, you talked a lot about the root work was in criminal justice and in criminal justice reform. Okay, so now we're dreaming of a world beyond economic inequality. So like, what is some of the work that Dream and your team are doing in dreaming beyond economic inequality today that kind of has hints of the type of work that you did on criminal justice reform?
Yeah. Well, we have always thought that you can look at pollution and you can look at climate and you could come up with a few solutions that may help with carbon emissions, plant more trees in, the Amazon, or, don't cut down trees in the Amazon. Those are solutions that do help. But for us, we think that poverty and pollution can be solved at the same time. So oftentimes, if you are only thinking about pollution and you're not thinking about the economy at the same time, you're not going to have a great idea. The same thing is true for justice. So, if we want to go back, it is about intersectionality, that these problems are inextricably linked. But like I said, the reason why they live under our roof is almost circumstantial. It was, we do want to dream our way to this future that has justice and equality in dignity and opportunity for all. We're progressives. We don't hide that we're progressives when we come to the table with everybody.
Yeah.
We say we're going to sit in our seat as progressives that have this common ground approach, and we want you to sit in the seat as a conservative with this approach, as a libertarian with this approach, whatever the reason is your approach. So we don't hide it. But with this progressive set of policies, the thought was we can't make progress on any of them unless we bring people together, unless we address polarization. So really just choosing criminal justice and climate were two big problem sets. And we thought if we can prove it there, we can prove it anywhere.
And so then the economic inequality becomes kind of that glued reality that says, if we can better help all of us at these tables to understand that the economic opportunities and consequences of criminal justice systems existing the way they do, or of the environmental world existing, and again, not to say, and I want to be clear, this is my words, not yours, but like it's this idea, right? Like we're not just pushing it back towards like capitalism as part of the solution because we're American capitalists. Like the reality is just capitalism done right, like capitalism done more equitably, capitalism done more accessibly, more fairly, is that combined with free voting democracy is the greatest system in the world. It's when it's done, it's the current iteration of capitalism that is being done poorly, that is being mismanaged, that is being misapplied, that is causing, it's a contributive causing factor. And so I love that it's not so much like, let's just tackle economic inequality. It's let's tackle economic inequality that happens as a result of these two pillar issues that we see that pervade society.
Yeah. One thing that as progressives at the table that makes us a little different is this idea that we do have a very strong belief that technology has a promise of a better future for us, that there is almost no way to dream ourselves out of the problems we're in today without technological innovation. That's not shared by all of our progressives. It's very much a pillar of what we do.
Yeah.
The other thing that distinguishes us, and I think this is what you're getting at, is that if we were just like, we will take any issue, which is exactly how it started, any issue and apply this way of solving problems, that would be too big. It would be too broad. Yeah. And so for us in trying to understand what do these things all have in common, we start with our progressive values more than anything, that freedom, dignity, equality, opportunity, that's who we are. We share that with a lot of people. I'm drawing you a Venn diagram now. So
I love this.
First, we have that progressive.
This would be great for the YouTube version. For those that are listening on audio, she's drawing us a Venn diagram.
Drawing you a Venn diagram. The first circle is progressive values. The second circle is this radically inclusive approach. That our approach, having the biggest table possible, it gives you better solutions. And we know that diversity gives you better solutions, but it also makes it more durable, not easily overturned, radically inclusive. But the third part of that Venn diagram is equity. That is a piece that does distinguish different groups on the left, is who are you fighting for? And for me, it's that underdog. And so all of our solutions are going to have equity. Who does this hurt first and worst? Who are the people most impacted by this problem? And is my solution speaking to them? So right in the center of that, progressive values, radically inclusive, equity, that's where you find dream.org. And that is a very unique position we take. So we could go into rooms where we're talking about climate reform on the Hill in DC, and it would not be us, not to mention the people that are in the poorest communities that suffer the most from pollution, and who also are getting the least amount of jobs coming from the green economy.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of infrastructure being built, and it might not hit the people who need those jobs most if we aren't in the room with that equity lens to it.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Economic inequality for us, you're right, it isn't a separate issue. But to distinguish in that way really does help us center that equity piece in everything we do. You're not going to find a solution for us that's polarizing and moves people. If it further polarizes people, it's not for us. Right. If it does not include those hurt the most by the solution, it's not for us.
Yeah.
And, if it doesn't represent our progressive values, it's not for us.
Yeah. It's by the way, not just a great organizational lesson from a leadership standpoint, but also just a great personal lesson for everybody listening and watching this conversation, right? Is before you're going to make any change, before you're going to become the person that decides to chain their neck to the fence, right? Or protest the WTO or do whatever it is you're going to do, before you got to look in the mirror and be rooted in your core values. Like,
Yeah.
what are the core things you stand for? And then stand everything else up upon that.
Yeah.
Right. As you go into the world. And again, it's not punitive. It's not competitive. It's not, I'm better than you. It's literally just, this is what I believe. This is who I am. If you're going to have and I love the way you just synopsized that. If you're going to have a conversation, or if you're going to pursue a conversation around solutions to any issues, and you're not going to factor in these things which I stand for, or these things which we believe fundamentally are intrinsically involved in these problems, then we're probably not the group to have at the table with you. Like, Godspeed, right. Good luck, but we're going to go try and foster a conversation over here that does involve that. That's really great lesson.
Yeah. I love that you brought up core values. I think that is so essential to this work of finding common ground. And I think it's so essential to finding that human quality amongst all of us. Because when you ask someone their core values, they're always different than your own. There is some overlap, but there's nothing wrong with their core values. You can't point out and say, that's a wrong core value. You're just like, oh, that's different than mine.
Yep.
Like, as a progressive, I value community. It's a big piece of me. You can count on me. If we're sitting anywhere and we're talking and we're trying to solve a problem, I'm going to have a community perspective I bring in there. When I work with my Republican colleagues on some of the issues, some of their core values is a lot around individual pursuit of the future, of wealth, of opportunity, is very much an individual aspect. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't want individuals to be hurt.
It's just different.
I can count on them to see how my solution might trample individual rights. I would not have seen that. That's a blind spot. Right. And so I can count on them to point out my blind spot. And if you're in good relationships, they will count on you to point out their blind spot as well. So we don't get into conversations where talking about racism is you get shunned and thrown out of the room. We're in the conversations where they say, you know what, dream.org is going to help point out this blind spot about how this impacts people in a different way when you put a race lens onto it.
Yeah.
That is welcome powerful. When you have good relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. Because what we can't do is we can't devolve into just a nihilistic point of view that says, like, and I say this all the time, zero-sum game is not a game that the world can win. Right. And so it can't just be, I'm right, you're wrong.
I love that.
It can't be, I don't want what you want simply because I don't want you to have, like that. And we do that. We're dangerously flirting with a lot of that right now. And that's the discourse that I love that your group, that you individually, that your group is trying to pull us up from, because that's a everybody loses game.
Yeah.
That's a Republican, Democrat loses. That's a progressive loses, conservative loses, poor people lose, rich people lose. Like, everybody will lose.
Right.
So we can't go down that path. In your TED Talk, you discuss a specific phraseology around unconventional relationships. Do you have an example of, like, a partnership, maybe? We've talked very generically about a number of different kind of cross-ideological partnerships, but do you have, like, one example of a partnership that was struck that might have even surprised you? Like when it was done, you're like, I can't believe that person and I, or that our two organizations just did that.
Plenty.
Okay. Share with us.
There are a lot of things that, like, sometimes they come out of my mouth now and I'm like, oh yeah, I did that. I hung out with that person. It is definitely bizarre. But like I mentioned, I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was very much a rebel. I would protest anything. And I remember one of the things as a senior in high school was the 1994 crime bill. And that was pushed by Republicans and Democrats. And the Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, from Georgia, was right in my backyard. So it was very easy for me to hate Newt Gingrich. Definitely an easy person to say that is my enemy. And to, joke with all my friends about how horrible he was and all sorts of things. Fast forward, 20, 30 years, I can't do the math in my head. And I am in a room with Newt Gingrich. We are planning a bill we are going to pass during the Obama administration, nonetheless. Continue to work on it during the Trump administration. And our teams worked tirelessly together and brought in a bunch of strange bedfellows.
Wow. I mean, by the way, this is already a great story. Just the Nisha and Newt Gingrich picture is already blowing me away.
We put a really strange coalition together that ended up passing the First Step Act, which is a historic piece of criminal justice reform legislation. Since its passing at the end of 2018, 40,000 people are home now from prison, 40,000 plus, because of one piece of legislation.
Incredible.
And this bill, although we started working on it during the Obama administration, when the administration changes, the president has to sign the bill at the end. So we are now in a world where we needed Trump to sign the bill. Well, it's really great to have Republican allies in that situation. One of the big proponents behind it, who got it in front of his desk, there are two strange allies in this fight. One was Jared Kushner, whose father had a history with incarceration. So he had a personal connection to the issue. Our other big ally was Kim Kardashian, our intern at the time, studying.
I remember reading about that. Oh, so okay, so she had been collaborating with you guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
She had worked as our intern in pursuing her law degree, and we've worked together on several of the cases she cares about.
Okay.
And to get Trump to sign the bill, you have his children saying this is important. You have Kim Kardashian going into the White House and saying, please sign this bill.
Like, if we got to figure out how to attack and attract the ego of a particular leader, like you guys had put all the pieces together to do that.
And in the end of the day, that's 89 incredible. Senators voted yes. So that's not a little bit of bipartisanship. That is a lot of bipartisanship. That means this will not get overturned.
Right. And you used a word earlier, which I think is absolutely critical whenever we're talking about policy, especially on issues like this, right? Durable. Right, that it is almost kind of unreversible, although that's a scary term to use nowadays.
There are people who want to reverse it, but it's very hard.
Right, durable. It's going to stand the test of time against the most egregious of attacks, which is incredible. Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, and there's a couple more things I want to talk about before we get to the end, to be respectful of your day. But these next couple are kind of important because I think it speaks to, at least from my point of view, and I believe in yours, it speaks to kind of what I call my pragmatic optimism, right? My hopefulness is rooted in the future, right? I talk oftentimes, I say here in Los Angeles, I'm a huge advocate of the entrepreneurial economy and opportunities in Los Angeles. And I often say, we use a phrase called long LA, like we're making long bets on it. And people say, what does that mean? And I say, well, for me, that means kind of what Los Angeles has the potential to become in its next iteration over the next 50 to 100 years. And people always laugh at me. They're like, dude, you're 56. Like, you're not even going to live to like the first edge of the middle part of that, right? I was like, no, I know, but that's the whole point. Like that's my belief system in life is if I'm only engaging in things that are going to enrich or empower me, like that's too short term a lens, right? So I want to talk to you. You're a mom. You've talked about your son, the pitcher. I think if I've done my research correctly, you're a mom, 2 boys.
No, my daughter is a junior in high school.
Okay, my apologies to your daughter in advance because I'm a girl dad, so that's the biggest sin I could have ever made. So talk to me. You're a mom of a high school girl and now I think your boy is in college, right?
Yeah, he's a sophomore in college now. Pitching.
Playing baseball.
So he is playing baseball. He is pitching. It did work. My pandemic gamble.
That sacrifice was well worth it, and
we're
also
alive, and he's still playing sports. Yeah,
created a bunch of other benefits. So talk to me as a mom. Who is you with all your values and doing the work that you do? How do we raise our kids to do better and be better, right? To engage with this world with this kind of a more open, empathetic mindset.
My answer to this might have been different just a few weeks ago, quite honestly. I think that mothering and parenting changes a lot. And all of us who are parents, well, we were also kids of parents one day. And so I do think that there's a lot of work in parenting that has to be so egoless, right? You are mothers, especially, constantly suffering for your kids. But in terms of what you wish for their life, you really have to be healed in order to take yourself out of it. And that has been one of the hardest things for me is, I want my kid to be the smartest because I was smart and they should get good grades. And I come from an Indian family. I had to get straight A's. Like
right.
There's just not an option. So there's a lot wrapped up in that can cause problems. But I remember when my son went off to college, I sat him down. He's willing to have long heart to hearts with me. My daughter, not so much. It's still a lot of eye rolls, but I told him the only thing I care about with him going off to college, like he's going to make a lot of his own choices now. The only thing I want to tell him is my expectation of him is that he is a good human being, period. Be a good human. You know what that means. You know it. And if you're a good human being and you're striving, whatever makes you happy, I'm going to support. But they have to know that that's the most important piece. And there are a lot of folks out there who don't think about those future generations and being good stewards of the earth and thinking about what would happen or the consequences for their actions. That's all we need to raise is kids that think of anything outside of themselves,
Foundation level. You're loved. Like I just heard, all through all that, I just heard, like, I told my son, and I'm your daughter, you're loved, you're worthy, be a good person.
Yeah. Just be a good human. Everything else
Yeah.
will
I
be
mean,
all
that,
right.
like, that's so, because think about it. There are so many, I'm literally vividly thinking of a few people that are in my life, close in my life, right? There are so many of us adults who haven't healed,
Yeah.
and maybe we're never told by their parents, right? Or I'm older than you. Many of us obviously grew up in generations where it was not as common to say those types of things, and so we grew up in different circumstances with our parents, and we
Yeah.
gleaned the lessons. In my case, I always say, like, my mom was the saving grace for my humanity, and my dad was my intellectual structure,
Yeah.
right? And I needed both of them to become who I am now, and then be the parent that I was to my daughter as a single dad. But the truth is, like, I know a lot of people who were never loved and were never told they were worthy and good enough. And now they then have unfortunately passed on some of that toxicity to their kids. And now their kids are going to just repeat the cycle.
Yeah.
But so I love
So
that.
that healing piece is really important.
Yeah.
And to be able to say, my son is smarter than me, my daughter is braver than me. They will do great things with that talent. And I don't know what it's going to be. And I can't live their life for them. They will figure it out.
Yeah.
And, we all have our different roles to play. So it's really
And
hard to get out of your own way and let them play whatever role it is. I did not ever think I would have jocks for children. I thought I'd have like guitar playing kids who write poetry and are
right.
in punk rock bands, but no, they're both jocks. So you just
Yeah, but they're spiritually you, right? So I mean, in that sense, they're having those conversations in those athletic circles,
hopefully.
right? But they're bringing that vibe. And by the way, if by any hook or crook we managed to be able to convince your daughter to listen or watch this podcast, she will give you both eye rolls for the fact that we're talking about her, but then she will take the comments that you just made about her and she will store that away. And those will become hugely
Yeah.
important things to her when she's in her late 20s and in her 30s. And I can say that projecting forward because that is what comes when you raise the kids that way. So
And
good
I
for you.
think that you just hit it. We have to believe in them
Yeah,
and tell them we believe in them
100%.
and then get out of their way when they have better ideas than us. Cause they,
100%.
yeah.
100%. Okay, so in the spirit of that, as the good Uncle Rob that I try to be, I reached out to my niece, who's a 16-year-old progressive, thoughtful, activist, community service oriented kid, also an athlete, but she loves with everything she has in her. Right? Her little sister, 3 years younger than her, is a little bit more calculating, a little bit more like, oh my God, she's Machiavellian. Like she's gonna do well in the world for this reason. And then Gabby, the junior in high school, is so thoughtful that I thought to myself as I built the script for the show, I thought, like, I want to know what Gabby thinks about the work that Nisha does.
Okay.
And
Great.
so I called her on Monday. I said, do me a favor, watch this woman's TED Talk. Share with me your thoughts. We DM each other about everything going on in election cycles, about the
Awesome.
politics, about life, all this, and about sports and the NWSL and all these different fun
Very
things,
cool.
right? But and I love her mom to death, right? And they trust me in that context of the relationship with their girls because I raised mine, and they've watched that happen over the last 25 years. So she watched and she came back to me with a very specific question. She loved what you said. She was impressed. She was deeply touched by some of the phraseology and the philosophies that you shared. She says, how can we introduce your Nisha's ideas of common ground into our public schools?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm paraphrasing her now, because I experienced a lot of divisiveness, hate, and tension at my high school in South Orange County, California,
Yeah.
in the immediate aftermath of the November elections.
Yeah.
So the question to you again is, how can we introduce your ideas of common ground into our public schools? And then I'll tack on a little Uncle Rob question attached to that, which is, like, is it important for us to expose the dream.org type philosophy and work in our public school system?
Yes. So I think it's a great question. I actually have gotten a lot of calls from high school kids, believe it or not, that do want to interview. And a common thing that I've heard is, depending on where they are, is that it's not safe for me to speak up and give my opinions or thoughts. And in Berkeley, we have an extreme version of it, which is, very much from, you have kids that will not speak up in class, who have nice, progressive, liberal parents with good, views, because they might say the wrong phrase and get shamed. And that is very real. that if you can't walk around as a Republican on a Berkeley High campus, it would be, I mean, everyone knows the one kid who has very Republican parents. I'm not kidding. And this is a school of 3,000 kids. And so it's like bananas. I think that, yes, this type of curriculum should be taught. It's basic. It's really basic conflict resolution 101. It's really basic, like having good conversations, listening. All of that is in the social emotional curriculum. When you get to the high school level, it breaks down a lot. So that good social emotional curriculum that's been introduced about how to be a good listener and how to de-escalate and those types of skills and building blocks you need, it all gets thrown out of the window. Hormones, politics, trying to figure out your identity. In high school, for some reason, we've forgotten that. So it should be introduced. I do think that student-led organizations can go a long way. Okay. What are those groups like Model UN, debate team, different configurations where you are supposed to have discussions and disagreement? How are they modeled? Can you have a student council where everyone gets the assignment, like take two sides of an issue? Make that normal. Nuance is not sexy. Common ground is not seen as a cool thing.
Right.
So for me, if anyone is going to make nuance cool, it's going to be high school teenagers.
I love that.
So I think if they can make their TikTok be about, you think it's black or white, actually, here's the gray area. If they can make gray area be the cool, sexy thing, we will be saved. So
wow.
I really do think it's a high school question. It should be there.
Yeah, I mean, it is right. It fundamentally, again, it's awesome. You are a viral star as a result of your TED Talk, and people can see it, and millions have watched it, and we can all as adults take those lessons and apply them in our ways. But scalable, and that's your word, right? Like scalable, better future is because of what your kids will do, your daughter, my niece, what they will do with this. I'll tack on to the end, Gabby, my niece that I'm referring to, is mixed race. And they do live in far South Orange County, which, if you know the euphemisms of politics in California, for some people that don't, that used to be called the Orange Curtain. It's far more purple and blue now, but like where they live is still like behind the Orange Curtain down in South Aliso, Laguna area, near San Clemente. And it's been post 2016, it's been an uglier, more divisive, more hate-filled world that is, for a lot of young women, especially, I think, with more traditionally open-minded thinking, it's become an unsafe place.
Yeah.
And so I will spare the podcast a lot of the personal discussions that she and I have had about the things that have been said to her, about her, around her. But she was really touched by your TED Talk because it gave her some hope that, again, like, okay, so cool, but now how do I do this as a 16, 17-year-old, right? How do
It's going to be really hard. Like Berkeley, I get, is a very different circumstance. You can send her to the little Republic of Berkeley up here, our independent.
Trust me, if she got into Cal, she would be there in a heartbeat. That's an easy one. But no, but your advice is, again, she runs a couple of clubs, right? So she is that kid. There are those kids in every high school. And the fact that she was asking about it is, I was like, okay, I'm going to put this in the podcast because I want Nisha and you to be able to speak directly about this with me just as the facilitator. So thank you for that.
I love
it. It's incredible. All right. So closing section, a couple questions to choose from. We love to try and make this a little bit more practical advice, something a little bit more bullet point. And if you have a minute, I might even ask you both. So the first one is, what are 2 or 3 practical steps that someone, and this is just anyone, can take to start building common ground with people that they disagree with on something? So like, what are the 2 or 3 practical, this is what I have to do before I can have this conversation with my friend, coworker, family member, et cetera?
Yeah. I'd change it a bit to, the first thing that came to mind is when you're in the conversation.
Fair enough.
One of the first things I do is say, find a place of agreement. It'll be there. Find that place of agreement and agree. Say it out loud and agree often. An easy example was around mask mandates. I was on that baseball team, right, where some people didn't wear them, and I was, wearing them. Definitely a hot butt issue at the moment. And the question, why aren't you wearing them? Or if someone said why they didn't wear them, it was simple, like, oh, I can't breathe in it. I agree. It is hard to breathe in it. oh, my kid is getting pimples and it's hurting their confidence. Yeah, that really sucks. Find that place of agreement and agree often, because they will do the same back at you. You sound unreasonable when you're like, I don't, but it's better to protect people. Like, yeah, that's how I think, but agree with the point that's real and right in front of you. I think that is a really important thing to do in a conversation. And then listen with curiosity is the other most important piece. We often are listening so we can make the point back instead of saying, I know how to, I'm going to respond to this, which often we do. That's human nature. Think, what's a question that's going to dig deeper? That, and a good podcaster knows that too. How do I get that good question that's going to go even deeper? And how can I get even deeper than that? Listen for the good question, because everyone remembers that, the person that listened and was curious and wanted to know about them. Those two things strengthen any relationship. And make a conversation, a hard conversation, a million times easier.
Yeah, 100% true. Those are hugely beneficial and pretty easily applicable, right? Those are things that we all run into in our day-to-day lives. So I really appreciate that. Thank you for that. And thank you for this. This has just been incredible. I will make a funny comment about something you just said there, which is a thank you for the nod of a good podcaster. But the funny part is, like, I have found since I do this, and I'll interview 4 or 5 people a week. We produce 50 shows a year. Like, it's constant, to the point where now I found that in some of my personal friendship conversations, like, I have forgotten how to just have like a normal conversation without sounding like I'm interviewing. I'll go to talk coffee with a friend and drop a great question, and then I'll just sit there like this, like I'm just and they're like, "Where's the?" And I'm like, "Oh God, I'm not interviewing you." That's right. So. No, it is a funny set of skills that get applied. But this is also like a great medium. That's why I love what I do, because it's ultimately a medium suited to me, to be me, which is the opportunity to have conversations with people like yourself, who, as I said in the beginning, I'm so grateful for, because you do wake up obsessed with a set of problems that I am aware of and that I care about, but that I don't have the bandwidth or the focus to be obsessed about.
Right.
And so knowing that you are waking up and then you are hiring and collaborating with other people on your teams, and you're partnering with, like, God bless you for going into the room with Newt Gingrich and working hand in hand over a decade and a half to get something done. Because I don't know that I would have ever even gone in the room with Newt Gingrich. Right. So that you are doing yeoman's work, as they would say, and it's work that is scaling, obviously, based on some of the examples that you've given us, and the practices and the principles, and even if we take some of the philosophies and the programmatic things that Dream.org is doing, and, as you say, kind of converted into almost curriculum-like types of things and tools that could be even scaled throughout our school systems. Which, wow.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I could see it. I could see. I'm fantasizing ahead. I could see a day where there's like a dream.
I should say we do have some youth programs. So I will.
Okay, I was just going to say, like, I could see like a Dream.org club system.
But we do have some.
Yeah.
We have a partnership with the NBA that we do youth cohorts for groups in some of their markets, where we get folks and we train them in our methodology and move them towards advocacy to be future change makers. So it's definitely. The only thing that stops up is us as resources, that other people aren't as obsessed with our problem as we are.
Right? Very much true. Thank you. We know each other a little bit. I now feel like I'm going to end this podcast feeling like we're friends.
Yes.
I will tell you, in case it isn't clear, like, you have a clear public ally in all the things that you do individually. I'm a huge fan of just, we're connected on social media, how you parent, how you love your kids, how you love and participate in your community. I hugely admire that. We need that times a million. We need a million more Nishas in the world, from just being how you are as a mom, but then how you lead Dream.org and yours and Van's original intentions. I couldn't be prouder to have had you guys join us on this podcast, so that we can expose our audience of entrepreneurial thinkers all across the Americas to these possibilities, because we are all trying to leave the world a little bit better place than we found it every day, I think.
Every day, right? I hope. Yeah.
You're doing great work. So thank you so much for visiting with us.
Thank you so much.
How can folks find you, connect with you, follow you, or find and connect with the organization?
it's so easy to find me because we're dream.org. It's definitely in the name. You can find me there. And I have a website too, which is my name, nishaanand.org, for more like writings and readings and other ways to connect.
It's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did recording it. As always, we thank you so much for listening and watching. Today's show was recorded here in Los Angeles and produced by the incomparable Deanna Bernal in Mexico City. You know, we can only grow this show by you listening and sharing the show with friends. So please find, like, follow, subscribe, and share our audio-only show on Spotify, Apple, or via any other popular podcasting platforms, as well as find the video version of our show now available on our YouTube channel over at Entrepreneurial Thinkers. And of course, you can follow along on our various social media platforms for fun and informative clips and content at Entrepreneurial Thinkers, wherever you can find us. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at I Am Rob Ryan on just about any social media platform. Gracias, thank you, and have an awesome day.